One of the first things we learn when we discover the Germanic Healing Knowledge is that more often than not, our physical health symptoms are healing phase symptoms. And this means paradoxically that being sick means being well. Nature makes no mistakes. God does not play dice. Instead, all of creation springs forth according to a few simple, elegant rules. All of creation, including your body. Know these rules and your body comes under your control. Welcome to Mind Over Symptom, where the pattern is revealed. Is it safe to resolve a schizophrenic constellation? One of the first things we learn when we discover the Germanic Healing Knowledge is that more often than not, our physical health symptoms are healing phase symptoms. And this means paradoxically that being sick means being well, which would almost be funny, except you and I have grown up in a world that sees being sick as something bad or dangerous or fatal. So we fear illness, even though 80% of illness symptoms are actually healing phase symptoms. Now, it's true that in some cases, for example, when we resolve an intense territorial loss conflict that's persisted without any resolution for a really long time, the healing crisis can actually be fatal. But that's an exception. However, this is why some teachers of GNM say that we have to be very careful not to solve certain kinds of conflicts at least. In this episode of Mind Over Symptom, I want to show you why we really don't need to worry about whether or not to solve a schizophrenic constellation, which is a constellation of two temporal lobe conflicts that are relayed from opposite temporal lobes. These are conflicts that have to do with masculine provision, protection, and boundary demarcation, as well as with feminine sexuality, identity, and belonging. In the healing phase of temporal lobe conflicts, we see bronchitis, pneumonia, laryngitis, coronary infarctions, lung embolisms, cervical cancer, esophageal, stomach, pancreatic duct, gall duct, and liver duct cancer or hepatitis, and we see diseases of the urinary tract, including kidney stones and bladder cancer. Some of those are pretty scary symptoms, right? And since a schizophrenic constellation means you've got two or more of these going on, that means you're going to have two or more of those symptoms if you resolve a schizophrenic constellation, right? Wrong. Let me back up a bit and explain how a schizophrenic constellation works. Schizophrenic constellations are this kind of alternate reality that we create and live in an attempt to make meaning when we're having a problem with object relations because of masculine and feminine boundary and submission issues. Temporal lobe conflicts, then schizophrenic constellations of two or more temporal lobe conflicts, occur when we're having trouble orienting ourselves to what we understand as our tribe or within our environment. It means we don't know our rights and responsibilities, or we feel we don't have these rights or responsibilities. And that's always an object constancy problem, a sense of not knowing who I am and who I am in relation to you. Not only is it safe to solve a schizophrenic constellation, the whole purpose of a schizophrenic constellation is the solving of it. That's actually the whole purpose of every conflict. That's the fifth biological law. When we overcome a conflict, we evolve, and we don't evolve unless we overcome something. The solution to a schizophrenic constellation is simply to zone in on what is true, despite the crazy weird stuff that our senses might be telling us. All you have to do is stay present to exactly what is true in this moment. True about yourself, true about your psyche, true about your situation as best you can tell. But don't trust your senses. You have to trust your higher self. Is this really safe to do? What if someone had the conflict for a really long time? What we're really asking here is, won't becoming present, resolving our conflicts in our psyche, and going into a healing phase be bad for us because of the cancer and the bronchitis and the coronary infarction and so on? There are two ways that special biological programs can really be dangerous to us. First, they can drain all your spare energy so that you become weak and fragile. Then you can just give out simply because of organ failure, malnutrition, and so on. Helmut Pilhar referred to this as your battery runs out. And that's a consequence of not solving your conflicts. The second way that a special biological program can be dangerous is that the healing crisis in the second phase of a special biological program can be so intense that it stops your brain. This is a really rare thing for old brain conflicts in the healing phase, but it is a possibility for a very long-term or extremely intense self-devaluation conflict from the cerebral medulla, and it's also a possibility for an intense territorial conflict affecting the coronary artery or the coronary vein. The rule of thumb for temporal lobe conflicts is 9 months. If a serious coronary artery or coronary vein program has gone on for more than 9 months, unabated, and then we resolve it, the healing crisis can permanently stop the brain. Now, I don't know how Dr. Hammer came up with this, but I suspect that it's because that's the length of a human pregnancy program, and that's also the length of the first part of the healing phase for certain cerebral medulla programs, including the testicle or ovary program, the kidney parenchyma program, and the adrenal cortex program. But it is not common that we stay in active conflict activity constantly. That's only the absolute most intense situations. And the more intense the conflict, the more likely we are to resolve it, actually, especially if we're right-handed. That's, after all, the purpose of a special biological program, any special biological program. We do it in our psyche, brain, and our tissue or functional activities. We do this special biological program for the purpose of helping us to resolve a conflict or conflicts. And so when we've had a conflict for a very long time, actually, we've usually just had the conflict several times over that period of time. Ask yourself, were there any healing phase symptoms during that time? Was there pain, fever, swelling, vomiting? Every time you went into the healing phase, and especially when you went through a healing crisis, you canceled out the conflict load. So maybe I've been depressed on and off for 5 years, but every time I stopped being depressed, it canceled the conflict load from when I was depressed. It's also not common for a temporal lobe conflict to go on and on and on for more than 9 months all by itself. Nature has a lot of built-in mechanisms to keep you alive. It's actually easier to stay alive than it is to die. You see these people with crazy, terrible lifestyles, a raging alcoholic for 50 years, people who abuse themselves with drugs, people who live hand to mouth in filthy conditions. Why are they not having heart attacks and lung embolisms or brain spasms that stop them permanently, take them out? It's because a schizophrenic constellation stops the buildup of conflict load. As soon as you have a second temporal lobe conflict, you stop loading conflict mass. The tissue or functional changes stop occurring. And what you get instead of tissue changes in the brain and body is you get a psychological symptom. Depending what the two constituent temporal lobe conflicts are, you're going to have some kind of schizophrenia. Bipolar maybe, or out-of-body feelings, or autism, or talking too much, or being obsessive-compulsive, or being a nymphomaniac or a Casanova. And this is actually especially common for left-handers. Another way that we know it's safe to resolve a schizophrenic constellation is that it happens all the time without killing people. For example, how many women do you know that have died of a lung embolism? This is the healing crisis for a right-handed woman who's resolved a sexual conflict. I bet you don't know very many women who've died of a lung embolism, but I bet you do know a lot of women who've had a sexual rejection or sexual conflict. It's probably the majority of women that you've known. They've had the conflicts, and then they've resolved them, and they've had their lung embolisms without even knowing it. I believe that we are afraid of resolving our schizophrenic constellations not because we're afraid of being unalived by it, by the healing phase or by the healing crisis. I believe that the real reason we're afraid of solving our schizophrenic constellations is because it's really difficult to become present to reality. So we're afraid of failure. It is difficult to become conscious and to solve our stuff. It's easier, at least in the short term, to remain in the constellated schizophrenic state than it is to take responsibility for our experience, for our psyche. But we actually don't have a choice whether to resolve conflicts, no more than whether to have a conflict in the first place. You see, the decision to resolve comes from your essential or quintessential self. Nature or fate decide. God decides. Even the GNM practitioner, with all their knowledge, has no choice about this. It's not the GNM practitioner who decides, it's life that decides. When we're working on ourselves, if we stay present to our discomfort, we'll also feel something else arising, something more real, capable, sensitive, and exquisitely aware of ourselves and our surroundings. This presence is not easy to attain, but it is the core solution to every phase of conflict, healing, the healing crisis, completing the second part of the healing phase, getting into a new normal, having a meaningful life, and even being present during our ultimate transition. Becoming present to reality and how we feel about it in our psyche is the answer all the way along. Ironically, even though it's so hard to attain presence, we're born with presence. We have to become schizophrenic in order to forget it. There is a risk of dying in life, but as we attempt to avoid those risks, we actually increase the risk. But in presence, there are no problems. There is no suffering. Everything is A-okay. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Mind Over Symptom. To make sure you don't miss an episode, subscribe now and please share with a loved one. The Mind Over Symptom blog lives at mindtreehealth.net, where you can get your free training about the natural laws of healing, and you can also get support. I'm Lishwi Springford, your guide for radical self-healing.